Welcome to the Not Boring Tech Writer, a podcast sponsored by Knowledge Owl. Together, we explore topics and hear from other writers to help inspire us, deepen our skills, and foster our distinctly not boring tech writing community. Hello, my lovely not boring tech writers. Normally in our schedule, this would be an interview episode, but for a whole bunch of reasons, that didn't seem like a good idea. A lot of podcasts take breaks around the holidays. So some of this is a nod to the chaos of the holidays, but also we wanted to give you something special to finish out the last of our episodes of 2025. And so we decided to do a compilation of clips from this year's interviews. A lot of podcasts do clips episodes, but they do them to focus on key themes for the year. And so they'll pull out clips from already released episodes to just kind of highlight those themes. And that's a great idea. I did not plan for it. But I wanted it to be something that you hadn't heard before. So I thought it would be extra fun to showcase clips that we had to cut from our interview episodes or that we used in sound check but weren't intended to actually be aired, so that we could give you a little bit of a peek behind the curtain of awesome or amusing things our guests said that you haven't heard yet. I guess I would consider this the round robin of guests. You don't know who's going to show up. One caveat I will say to that, though, we didn't decide to do a clips episode until we were already halfway through this year's recordings. So you'll notice that most of these clips are coming from the second half of the year. If you were a guest from the first half of the year, I promise this is not an intentional oversight. You are amazing. I would love to use a clip from your episode. I just didn't plan far enough ahead to include you. So you'll just have to come back and be a guest again if you want to make it into the clips episode. So to kind of prep you for what you're going to hear next, we have a couple clips from our pre-interview sound checks. So let me explain that process just a little bit. Before we begin recording an episode, I usually record a quick sound check with each guest just to make sure that we're both sounding good. And so we'll do a quick little recording. I'll stop it. I will listen to the recording. And then if it seems like we need to make adjustments on microphones or, hey, can you take your dog out because I can hear the jingle of their collar or whatever, we'll make those adjustments. Then we'll do another sound check and we'll head into the full-blown episode interview. So these sound checks are never intended to end up in a real episode. So they are a little bit of a fun peek behind the scenes. I think the couple guests whose sound checks we pulled for this would be totally supportive of us using them. The majority of the clips are actually from interview segments. So from proper interview recordings. And most of these clips made it into our initial rough edit of the episode, but then got cut from the final edit. And often they got cut most often just due to time. We were looking to shave, a minute or two off of the overall episode length. And whatever clip we pulled felt like it was a way that we could reduce that without compromising the integrity of the episode. Sometimes it's just for pacing purposes. It felt like some of the stories might have gone just a little bit long and there wasn't a good way to cut them to be shorter. So we just cut them completely. And that's why I'm sharing them here. Some of them are absolutely fantastic ideas. We just had to trim the fat somewhere, so to speak. And so for these episode clips, I will introduce them a little bit more just to kind of set the context and the scene for you before we jump directly into them. So with that in mind, let's get into each of our clips. Introductions are one of my least favorite parts of recording an episode, mostly because they have the most possible points of failure. I don't write or script them. I need to pronounce someone's name correctly, which is always a mildly stressful thing, no matter how straightforward their name is. It's funny how when you start doing an introduction, you completely forget how to say words. And I'm usually trying to introduce a bit of how I know the person while they're sitting there staring at me. So intros are hard. And Liz Argall offered to try to do her own as a way to change things up. Although we ended up using my less entertaining intro in the final episode, I still wanted to share her very gracious attempt at doing her own. All right, Liz, take it away.
Hello, welcome to the Not Boring Technical Writer podcast. Your host is the amazing, awesome source, Kate, and whose last name I am blanking on right now, so I'll have to redo that.
It's Mueller.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Our amazing host is Kate Mueller, and I am the guest, Liz Argall. I am a technical writer at large, and we're going to talk about all sorts of stuff: permaculture and diataxis framework, and how to be awesome and soft with yourself with your writing. You know, it's all a process, man. It's all a process.
As I mentioned in the intro, our guest sound checks are usually just random conversations, never intended to make it into a real episode. However, I'm going to break that rule. In Liz Argall's case, I have to share part of her sound check since she shared a vocal warm-up that Charles Brandreth does that cracked me up. And I may or may not use this warm-up now before my solo episodes.
Testing 1, 2, 2. Testing 1, 2, 2.
Have you hit your P's? Would you like some sibilance?
Here's a wonderful vocal warm-up that Charles Brandreth does this every morning, which is how he has still good diction in his 70s. Every morning he goes to the bathroom in the mirror and he says, hip bath, lavatory, lavatory, bidet, douche.
I love that. I might have to start using that.
Hip bath, lavatory, bidet, douche.
Dennis and I also had fun with his sound check, so I wanted to share part of it. Not for any particular reason other than if you haven't listened to episode 22, this is a pretty good introduction to what you'll get with the two of us.
You know, it's fascinating how excellent I sound. I sound good because it's important that I impress people with the quality of my voice. Otherwise, they won't listen, even if I'm saying things that are somewhat interesting, which is not likely, but it could have.
It is incredibly important as a writer that you sound amazing,
That's right.
Dennis. So I'm glad that you have your priorities straight. Sarah Walker's interview on teaching yoga and writing documentation was far-ranging. We had a really good time, and we had to cut this next clip for time. But to set the stage, Sarah and I were talking about the importance of establishing good foundations in both yoga and documentation. Sarah talked about how useful it was for her to be able to dig back into overview documentation on features she hadn't used once she had to go in and actually update new docs on them. And this clip is what we cut immediately after that comment. I was sad to cut it because it's the only reference to beginner's mind in the interview. And that's a concept I believe we all channel often as tech writers. So I'm really happy I get to share it here. The number of times I have done this in the Knowledge I'll Support KB would probably be staggering to other folks to know. But if you haven't touched a feature in a long time and somebody asks you a question about it, or in my case, because I have been updating nearly the entire support KB because of changes to the nav and the UI, I get into a feature and I'm like, thank goodness I wrote like a good conceptual overview here because I had forgotten some of the nuance in how this feature worked. And in order for me to do a little bit of content reorganization and reapply my style guide, I really need to have a sense of the whole that I'm trying to manage. And man, that overview is useful. And some of the features I've run into are oldest features, things that I didn't touch a lot when I took over the support KB. I've gotten into those and been like, oh, well, I need to write that now. That doesn't exist. There is no foundation pose here. I'm going to have to create it so that I can then build back into it. And you know that you have an uphill battle there because there's going to be nuance that you forget coming into it retroactively, but it's also really useful because it's like you're a beginner on that thing and it reminds you what that new user's journey is when they first come into the feature. So it's a nice humbling moment.
There were a few of the instructors in teacher training who would always say, maintain beginner's mind, always be open to learning, always be open to being in that place where you're not sure exactly what's going on. what to expect, but nevertheless open to learning. Because even when you are in the advanced classes and you're doing some scorpion poses where you're balancing on your forearms and your legs are up and then you bend your legs and your toes are touching the top of your head. Not a pose I could ever do. I am cursed with really wide hips and then I have a SI joint instability, which made certain poses really difficult, especially as the years passed. But even when you're doing poses like that, like what I would call the pretzel poses, you still have to approach it with the idea of the foundation. What is the foundation of this pose? In scorpion, it's your forearms. Your forearms are on the ground. That is literally your foundation. You build up from there. If you don't have those forearms positioned well, if you are not mindful of how they are helping to support the weight of your body, how they are interplaying with gravity, your scorpion's going to fall apart. And you could easily get hurt if you fall out of the pose badly. So again, it goes back to that beginner's mind. Where do I start? I got to start with the foundation. In the documentation, in this one doc, what's the opening idea? What's the opening concept? What's the grounding concept? Let's build from there. Mm-hmm. And once you have your foundation, once that is steady and stable, and you're aware of its steadiness and stability, and you've grasped those concepts, then you start building on top of it. And you don't build willy-nilly. You have to sequence so that the reader, so that the student can connect the ideas or the parts of the body. It's not like you can disconnect parts of your body, but if you're transitioning, like if you're in Trikonasana, triangle pose, and you've got your feet and legs in the position, and then you start thinking about where your hands should be, you kind of lost it because you went from your foundation out to the windows. You didn't build the walls. You didn't put a roof on it. You went so your house is going to fall apart. So in sequencing within a doc and even within a category and in a knowledge base, or even the whole of the knowledge base, you build your foundation, you present the key ideas, and then you build on them. You can't start talking about advanced features until the reader is understanding the basic steps, the basic how-tos, the ideas that build on the core feature proposition, like for product recs.
In this clip from Sarah Walker's interview, we were talking about the importance of sequencing in both yoga poses and documentation. Sarah gave me this quick, lovely walkthrough on yoga pose sequencing. It was a little too detailed on the yoga side for me to feel like it fully fit in the published episode, but it was so good I didn't want to lose it. I can still picture Sarah gazing into some space kind of between us, moving some of her limbs as she talked her way through it. And while many of us might not know the details she's discussing, the thoughtfulness in the sequencing is something I suspect we can all relate to.
One of the sequences I really enjoyed teaching was eventually building into Warrior 3 with a variation where as you were one leg on the ground, the same hand on the ground, on the floor, and then the arm that extends up, reaches behind, you bend the floating knee, and you grab it, kind of forming a lasso with your upper leg or your leg that's parallel to the floor. And some folks called it shoot the moon. I always thought of it Chandrasana, half moon pose. But you can't flow right into that. You have to go through some, go from Tadasana to, say, triangle pose to start that extension of the spine, opening of the legs, of the hips, extending out through the front body through the back body, bringing the shoulders down because you don't want your shoulders eating your ears, being all hunched up. And again, finding that opening with the breath. And then you work from triangle into warrior two to find the rotation of the hips and the bending of the forward knee to help warm up your hamstrings and your quads. And then start building toward warrior three, where both arms are extended, one leg is reaching back, one leg is still grounded, and then flowing down into Chandrasana with the hand on the floor, the other arm extended, opening still up, finding that balance, still maintaining your good foundation with that foot that's grounded, finding that flow of breath in and out of the body. You're not clenching, you're not holding your breath, trying to focus. It's life is flowing. And then you can shoot the moon. You can bend that knee. You can reach back and hold on to your foot or your ankle and shoot the moon.
Ryan Macklin's interview on empathy advocacy gave me a lot to chew on. And it was also the first interview where I flagged a clip to be saved for this very episode. In this clip, Ryan and I were talking about working with customers who might be in a primed or triggered state. I'm sharing it now for two reasons. First, as someone who's worked in support off and on in my career, I really appreciated that Ryan is an empathy advocate, but that this advocacy extends to ourselves and setting and maintaining boundaries with customers. I think this is a point that often gets lost when we talk about support and empathy. The second reason I'm sharing it is a little bit more selfish. I wanted to be sure we shared Ryan's phrase of absolute stick fuck with the world, just in case you needed more phrases in your curse word toolkit.
Here are reasons why they're going to be that way. It is not your job or your responsibility to accept their actions if their actions are crap. Like, that is not on you, like that is on them. But if you at least understand where they're coming from, then when they're, as long as they're not being complete, I don't know if you swear on this podcast.
Go ahead.
The term I use for these people are absolute stick fucks. As long as they're not being that, then, you're going to be like, oh, hey, I know you're angry. You're not taking it out on me, but you got that energy. So I will. Or if you do take it out on me, maybe you roll back for a moment and say like, hey, I apologize. Cool. I know where you're coming from. I can kind of adapt what I'm trying to explain to you, knowing that you're in a primed state. But if somebody is, of course, being an absolute stick fuck, then you'd be like, okay, you actually need a timeout. As a customer, you need a timeout. I don't actually need to support you while you were doing this, because one, you're projecting energy onto me, which is going to make my day harder and my moment harder with you. And then two, you're going to be less receptive to what I am trying to help you with.
This episode is sponsored by KnowledgeOwl, your team's next knowledge-based solution. You don't have to be a technical wizard to use KnowledgeOwl. Our intuitive, robust features empower teammates of all feathers to spend more time on content and less time on administration. Learn more and sign up for a free 30-day trial at knowledgeowl.com. Nick Graziade's episode was recorded well before we thought up a clips episode. But there was one clip in it that was kind of a problem clip for me during the editing. I debated it a whole bunch, and I ultimately ended up cutting it for time. And I was on the fence about it for so long that it had stuck with me. And so once we decided that we were going to do this clips episode, I felt like we had to go back and find it. So we did a bunch of extra digging to go back and recover it. And I want to share it with you now for two reasons. First, Nick's very into philosophy, and this was his lone philosopher name-dropping moment. And I want you to get to experience him in his full glory, just as I did. And second, Once we shift past philosophers, we start to dig at the idea of content hierarchy as the only form of information architecture and how limiting that is. Even though neither of us actually uses the phrase information architecture, this is part of what we're talking about. But Nick talks a lot about the flaws of very deep hierarchies, and we both talk about the fact that hierarchy isn't the only way to help architect information for findability. And that point kind of got lost as we cut the clip, and it also didn't totally hang with the rest of the episode, but it still feels like a point worth emphasizing. So here it is.
Maybe it'll be the last thing I say, but one of the things I bring into a lot of this is I look at this from a standpoint of everything that I kind of digest kind of feeds into my technical communication career. I'll be very clear and say, like, this is definitely my career. This is what I do. I say it's my day job. I say my night job is being a musician and my day job is being a technical writer, which is very true. But the point being, I think one of the things about dialectic, and particularly like dialectic materialism, where we're not looking at ideas here, we're looking at like the actual tangible things you work with. And this is a term that, really comes out of like the Frankfurt School and some modern thinkers. I'll just throw some names out there so I sound important, but like Theodor Adorno and Foucault and Chomsky, and I'm going to talk about my favorite guy, Mark Fisher, too. And like a lot of these guys are looking at these kinds of dialectic, particularly from a cultural standpoint. And I think what becomes important is that we do have a cultural standpoint of technical communication that people actually get really fixed to. And one of the things that makes me think about how I can restructure things is a lot of people's kind of marriage to hierarchy. And I think I alluded to that a little bit earlier. But one of the things I used to do all the time was I would train on SharePoint. And one of the biggest questions I would always get was, so what folder is this in? What folder is that in? What folder is this in? And the first thing I would have to tell people, which was usually the first slide of my presentation, was a library is not a folder. It's a different thing. And that's really critical when you're working on one of these state contracts, government contracts, and you have really secure information that you have to keep locked down. But also, people expected everything to live within this kind of like nested structure. And that's not how information often resides. Sure, you can apply one taxonomy to things and you can say like, here's level 1, here's level 2, and here's level 3. But that can actually get really repetitive and in its own right become difficult. So if you have something that is level 1, let's just let's use a simple example, and we'll say that the country is level 1 and the state is level 2, and then the city is level 3. That's an easy one to hierarchically organize because I don't have overlap between the things, right? Like the state of New York where I live, that's a state. Like the city of Troy where I work, that's only going to be the city of Troy in New York if it's in the New York folder. And if it's like another folder, like if it's in the Michigan folder, I think there's a Troy, Michigan, like, cool. I just picked a random state that worked out pretty well. Well, I know you're from the Upper Peninsula, so that changes things a little bit. But anyway, regardless though, like if I change that up, like, yeah, if Troy's in the Michigan folder, then clearly it's relating to the Michigan one. But let's look at something that's a little more nebulous. Like, what about something like the software that you're using that integrates with one another? So let's say you're using like GitHub or something, and you have a connection between GitHub and Jira, which is what we do. We use that for our like merge requests. And I could put it in the GitHub folder. I could put it in the Jira folder. I could put it in a third place, but there's not a very clear demarcation as to which has more importance. And I think a lot of people have trouble understanding that because I'll see these really thick directory structures that have subdirectories and subdirectories and so on that are empty because they're trying to mimic the same thing over and over again. And at a certain point, I thought to myself, that's not going to be easy to find anything. So I actually created a library on SharePoint, and the only demarcation between different things was a whole set of metadata. So it's really more like sorting by Venn diagram rather than sorting by folder or hierarchy. We have to like create a taxonomy. We have to create some kind of taxonomy and categorization. But what about that categorization can I then overlap with other things? Because then I can filter things and find exactly what I need much more rapidly than if I'm going directory, subdirectory 1, subdirectory 2, subdirectory 3. It's not always the easiest way to navigate. Sure, I could use a search function, but even then, it doesn't give me the context of what's around it. I think having really well-defined metadata in these circumstances kind of eschews that idea of everything has to live within a hierarchy. And I think kind of this modern idea of dialectic, particularly within the technical documentation space, is sometimes difficult to break from because you look at best practices, you look at the things that people have done for a long time and that have worked traditionally. Those are best practices for that reason because they have traditionally worked. But you also don't want to fall into the circular argument of this has always worked, so why should we change it? Having that kind of ability to think rationally about what you're doing, and then again, going back to what we talked about earlier, being able to justify why I'm doing this thing that's different, that breaks the rule, that's going to be such a fundamental aspect of injecting creativity and solving a problem in technical communication. I don't want people who are going to be so rigidly attached to a structure that you can't change it even if there's a better way.
I think sometimes people use structure to do multiple things when that's not really what structure is there for. Somebody really has to internalize that hierarchy for them to reap the full benefit of a hierarchy that's that strict and also that deep. And part of what you're actually trying to achieve with that is this feeling of continuity and maybe organization. But really the underlying needs there are that, like, how do I move laterally through stuff? Where do I find, like, this isn't exactly what I need, but I feel like I'm in the general neighborhood of what I need. If you make somebody go up 3 levels to then go down 3 levels to find the thing that should be somewhat related, your hierarchy isn't doing you any favors there. If you've got, let's say some tag metadata, where they can be like, oh, I found this thing, God knows where it is in the hierarchy, but it is on the topic I need, but not the set of, not the exact task that I need. And you've got some metadata that helps them leap into other resources that are on that same topic, but a different set of tasks. You've now enabled them without having to internalize any of the freaking hierarchy and without necessarily even understanding what they need to search for, to browse their way through, forage through all of that information to find the thing that they actually needed somewhere. And I think sometimes we try to make hierarchy solve all of those problems at once, and content organization can't solve all of those problems. That's why things like metadata exist. It's why search exists. It's why we add cross-references and related articles and other things, because we know that people's brains work differently. And just because this hierarchy made sense when we built it to the people who we tested it with doesn't mean it's going to make sense to the next person who walks through the door who has to try to find the documentation here. So you want to enable those different methods of kind of discovering the content and engaging with it. And use the features that are custom built for that stuff. And don't depend on your content hierarchy to do all of that work, because it can't and it won't. And it will fail.
Yeah, that's spot on.
Oh, there we go. I sound really good at the end of this episode. It's beautiful. There is one clip from a very early episode that a guest thought we would cut, and then we left it in anyway. So this is the only clip I'm sharing that actually is in a published episode, but that's because of how much I love it. In Janine Chan's episode, which was my second interview ever, we were talking about how to make things fun for yourself. And I asked Janine if there were any ways she'd managed to do that. Listening back to the episode, she doesn't fully answer that question, and I will have to spend a little time soul searching about whether I was a good podcast host or not there. But we ended up in a really funny exchange, especially considering that at the time we didn't know each other incredibly well, and we have since become a lot closer friends. So I hope this makes you chuckle as much as it does for me.
The more frustrated I got with it, the more I wanted to fix it, and the more satisfying it was when I figured out, I don't know, you remember what it was. I think part of it is just what your brain enjoys fixating on. which is less of a Jedi mind trick, and I guess where it intersects with personality and the kinds of challenges you enjoy. Because I find that the angrier something makes me, the more I enjoy fighting with it. And this is just work. This is not to say that I have incredibly toxic friendships or anything like that.
I would hope not. I was about to be very worried for you, Janine.
As my friend Kate, welcome to hell.
I'm now second guessing everything about my personality and why we've stayed in touch. Kate Pond's episode dropped right as we were compiling this Clips episode. So we didn't have a lot of turnaround time, but I also didn't want to leave her out. In our conversation, we focused on her daily check-in form. And since that seemed like the most useful thing, that's largely what we focused on in the published episode. But for those of you who read the blog post, you'll know she mentions both a daily and a weekly check-in. And this is the brief sidebar we had about weekly check-ins.
My weekly evaluations were like, what did you accomplish last week? Or did you accomplish last week's goals? Do you have anything to say about last week's goals? What went well this week? What needs improvement? What are your goals for next week? But a lot of that stuff was kind of like covered in the daily.
Yeah, it's almost like you could maybe do some kind of aggregation from the daily into the weekly.
Yeah.
I mean, right now I have a sort of like a weekly thing. We do like a weekly check-in at work. And I do find the like, how did you feel at work this week? As a collective, like overall, how do I feel? My 1 to 10 or my 1 to 5 scale or whatever. Sometimes looking at that in retrospect for the whole week rather than the sort of like ups and downs of individual days. To me, that might be a useful data point, but that's one question. Right? Like a lot of the other daily stuff you could accumulate, but it also might be a little interesting to be like, let me just rate overall how I felt at work this week or how I felt about what I was doing this week.
Yeah. So you can definitely still have like a one question weekly evaluation if you wanted.
I struggle with the weekly because I only have the weekly and I forget what I did early in the week by the time the end of the week rolls around. And I'm like, I know I did more than this. Crap. I don't know what it was though. Was it just that it was forgettable? Yeah. I didn't like it? Was it so great I've blocked out that it was work? I don't understand.
It would be pretty great if these Google Forms had some kind of reward. It was like Duolingo rewards at the end of filling out your form, right? You got gems because you filled out your form at the end of the day, right?
This feels like an app idea to me, really. It feels like an app idea. Let me gamify daily reflection.
That was kind of my goal as a founder, right? Was to come up with ideas to see what I could put together.
And that finishes our 2025 Clips episode, which is also our final episode of 2025. Putting together this episode has reminded me just how amazing all of this year's guests have been. Y'all have been enthusiastic, passionate, funny, and generous human beings. Each of you left me feeling enriched and often gave me ideas or insights that stuck with me long past our recording. And based on our listener feedback, the same was true for a lot of our listeners. So well done and thank you. I can't wait to see you all next year for even more not boring shenanigans. In the meantime, stay out of too much trouble, practice your vocal warm-ups, and if you have ideas for topics or guests, if there's a bit of the tech writing world that your life would be improved by hearing an episode on, or if you just want to tell us what you're getting out of the show, please message us on LinkedIn or Blue Sky at The Not Boring Tech Writer or email tnbtw@knowledgeowl.com. The Not Boring Tech Writer is co-produced by our podcast head of operations, Chad Timblin, and me. Post-production is handled by the lovely humans at Astronomic Audio with editing by Dylan, transcription by Maddie, and general post-production support by Bean and Alex. Our theme song is by Brightside Studio. Our artwork is by Bill Netherlands. You can order the Not Boring Tech Writer t-shirts, stickers, mugs, and other merch from the merch tab on thenotboringtechwriter.com. You can check out Knowledge Owl's products at knowledgeowl.com. And if you want to work with me on docs, knowledge management coaching, or revamping an existing knowledge base, go to knowledgewithsass.com. That's knowledgewithsass.com. Until next time, I'm Kate Mueller, and you are the Not Boring Tech Writer.